Let's wait till I get going.
Right, we're ready for part one and Ben.
Yeah.
We're ready for part one. Is everybody back in the room? Back in the room.
Back in the room.
I haven't got my little sidekick with him at the minute. She's in the van.
James in the toilet.
Back in. Ooh.
We're starting.
Right. Ben Emlyn Jones, is there any hope?
Yeah. Well,
Please answer that.
I will try to answer that. Yes, I will. It's an interesting it's an interesting thing to talk about because everything that Richard's talked about refers to natural disasters, things over which we have no control, and these things will affect us, and they're going to happen, and they will have a huge effect on our society and our species, and threaten maybe the survival of our species. But the best chance we have, I think, is to look inwards and realise that if these things are inevitable, how we behave, our own attitudes, our own thoughts and feelings, on our own society, will be have enormous effect on us, on how we cope with these things, whether we survive or whether we do not. For example, just to give you an example, Richard talks about Micronova, solar flares, things like that, such as the Carrington event, which did wipe out all the telegraph lines in 1876. Of course, telegraph lines today are a lot more of them. We need them; they're more sophisticated. Everything's dependent on these electronics.
The magnetic field speeded up. It's flipped since the Carrington event.
Oh right, yeah. So obviously, if something like that happened, we'd be in big trouble. But like I said, if we stuck together, we look after each other. A solar flare can wipe out an electric grid, but it can't wipe out electricians, and we could repair it. But if we all, like I said, if we all go nuts and we behave badly, we're selfish, we're stupid, we're foresighted, we're cowardly, then I think we don't have any chance. So that's what I mean. But is there any hope? It's our decision whether there is or not. Now, the alternative title to this talk is What's Going to Happen Next? Now, some of you have already heard this talk, and I'll try to make it a little bit different today, just slightly, although I will go through the major points I went through last time. I'm going to give you a series of perspectives on what I think is going to happen in the next couple of years, based on my study of current affairs and the immediate past. So that's the purpose of this. Ian R. Crane, this is for you. Bill and I both know this guy well. Yeah. This man died a few months ago after a long career of being one of the pillars of our community, anti-fracking activist, a former oil company executive who's living the high life within normality and conformity, and could have continued to do so quite comfortably for the rest of his life, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to do it. He abandoned everything to live in a caravan, to fight the New World Order, organise the Alternative View conferences, try to stop the fracking. And he left this world a couple of months ago, and he's going to be very, very sadly missed. We'll never forget him. So I'm dedicating this talk to the one and only Ian R. Crane. Never forget him. Right, now when it comes to civilization, there are what I consider 4 pillars of civilization, and these are, I'm going to go through them one by one, and one of those is a productive economy. A civilization has a productive economy that produces a lot of wealth that allows its citizens to live a high standard of living. Now that is under threat right now. At this time, the economy no longer allows people to enjoy a high standard of living. Most people actually are struggling financially far more than they were a few years ago. I don't know anyone who's better off financially than they were. And you see it in various different ways. For example, there's this thing called the precariat, something I never heard of before, but there are millions and millions of people who are now classified as part of the precariat. These are people simply in casual employment. This was something that was virtually unknown when I started work, which was for leaving school, which wasn't that long ago. Today, there's millions and millions of people in that situation who have no contracted employment at all, who just get shuttled from agency to agency, from place to place. None of the benefits of being invested as part of a workplace community, which used to happen. I've got a feeling that there's lots of other things that already people used to take for granted that are already entering the history books. And 2 in particular come to mind: retired people and housewives. Anyone here who's a housewife? Has anyone ever been a housewife?
Oh, no.
You might have been in the past. Yeah. As for retirement, I mean, there are some of you I know are retired. you may be the last, unless things change, if things get worse, you may be the last generation of people who will ever be able to describe themselves as retired. If things don't get better in the future, history books in school will show pictures of women cleaning their homes and looking after their children and dedicating all their time to that, and of old men playing golf, and children will go, "What's that, Mr. Smith," or the teacher? In the past, you know, people actually earned enough money, so they, for the last 2 or 3 decades of their life, they didn't have to work. And that was called retirement. And people earned so much money that a family could survive on a single income alone. And so one of the parents, usually the mother, was free to dedicate all her time to bringing up her children, looking after her family. They were called housewives. But it's not like that now, is it? No, people just work till they die. Both men and women work. The children, well, what happens with the children? Well, the state comes along and says, "Don't you worry about them, we'll take care of your children for you, you get to work." And they put them in daycare centres and schools where they get jabbed and they get poked and prodded and have their minds warped and all kinds of other horrible things. So that's the economy is under attack. This refers to, this says free speech, of course, but when it comes to the issue of free speech, that to me includes all forms of logic, science, the free exchange of ideas, for which we humans have a of all the creatures in the animal kingdom, humans have a propensity for, way above any other species, the ability to process ideas internally and express them through spoken language. That is now under threat. We're being told there are certain opinions you can't have, which are effectively criminal. They're semi-criminal or even fully criminal. To express, well, you see, they say, well, you can think these things, but you can't say them, because if you say them, you can lose your job. You can be ostracised from society. You can be banned from using social media, or even literally put in jail. In some countries, you can be put in jail more than others, but the whole world, every nation on earth, is becoming increasingly authoritarian when it comes to the expression of certain ideas. They'll use excuses like these things are hurtful and offensive. But well, that's just life. That's something. If I find things, if there's things I find hurtful and offensive, it doesn't give me the right to stop people saying them. Now this is going to have a terrible effect. It's going to have the effect when people are not allowed to talk about certain things. They're going to stop thinking certain things. They're going to think in a certain way, as George Orwell understood perfectly well in his book 1984, which was actually centred on that theme. The control. He knew that the battlefield of the future would be the human mind. You can't have big gun battles anymore. You can't have battlefields, tanks and soldiers. You can't really do that on a large scale anymore in this world. We're too destructive. Any war like that would quickly escalate to the exchange of nuclear weapons, which would destroy everything. So we're now in the world of 5th generational warfare, which includes cyber terrorism, which I'll talk more about towards the end of this talk, and propaganda. That is psychological warfare. I must say, I mean, I have a bit of a claim to fame. I was very close at one time to Isabel Menzies Lythe, who was one of the founders of the Tavistock Institute. I was kind of her step-grandson, actually. And I can tell you, she's one of the most evil people I've ever known.
That explains a lot.
Yeah. She's one of the most evil people I've ever come across in my life. And she did have the ability to warp people's minds. I do not exaggerate. It's a long story. I could tell you more another time, but that's a massively long story. The rule of law. Now, this is a scene from a riot last year. There were huge riots across the world, especially in the United States, following the killing of George Floyd. These came under the banner of Black Lives Matter, and it was always thought that this was like a grassroots organisation. It wasn't. Black Lives Matter has a huge budget. It's funded by billionaires, George Soros, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. And what's even more perverse, even before George Floyd died, preparations were being made for the riots. How is that possible? But bricks were being bought from builders' yards to be used as missiles and things like that. Petrol was being used was being bought in large quantities for Molotov cocktails. I think it was a situation rather like in the film RoboCop, where at one point the characters turn to each other and they say, "We just wait for some poor sod to volunteer." Well, George Floyd was the volunteer. They were just waiting for something like that to happen, and that was just the trigger to release and start what was already being planned. We've been fooled on an enormous scale. But this was allowed to happen. The police did not intervene to stop any of this happening. And people no longer, I think most people don't feel safe. Most people I know do not feel safe in this world from crime. And they also, more and more people are becoming to realise that the criminals and the state are essentially collaborators. When it comes to the control of crime, criminals are never controlled. It's the victims who are controlled. And more people are coming to realise this. The fourth pillar of civilization, which is also under attack, is democracy. Now, when I say democracy, I know that there's all kinds of problems with democracies. We know it. It's perhaps not the ideal system we're under, despite the fact it's supposed to be. There are all kinds of reasons to do with the elites controlling people's thoughts and behaviour, which really undo some of the good that democracy was supposed to do. But when I say democracy, what I mean is what the Chinese called the Chinese had a phrase, the mandate of heaven. They said that their emperors would only remain in power if they are under the mandate of heaven. That was very, very similar to the European idea of noblesse oblige. In other words, if with power comes responsibility and accountability for the people. I'm talking about the need to have a leadership which is subject to selection and recall by proper due process by the population. And we don't have that. Electoral fraud is rife. I can give you there's numerous examples all over the world of the CIA interfering in elections all over South America, for example, and across the world. Yet what we've found, what has happened very, very blatantly, very openly, is that kind of electoral fraud has been carried out in the world's principal democracy, the United States of America. The last presidential election was not conducted properly. The current person in the White House is not the properly elected president. He's an imposter. And it's a long subject, but I think that's a provable case. So all four pillars of civilization are under attack. And what's more, the attack is coordinated. It's been done deliberately. Unlike random events like solar flares and earthquakes, this is something being carried out for a purpose by a group of people, if indeed they are people, who are controlling this world. Wars now seem to be breaking out everywhere. Although I said that full-scale wars are no longer really possible. Small-scale ones are, but small-scale wars can have a huge effect on a nation's morale, on its self-esteem, whether you are where the war is taking place or not. Even the nations where the war is taking place. In this case, no war has taken place in the countries such as the United States and Britain. There's been lots of wars across the Middle East. Of course, this has had a devastating effect on those countries, but it's had a devastating effect across the world. And despite what I said about finance, the resources to carry out these wars is limitless. It appears to be a blank cheque. Resources can always be found, or at least credit can always be found to pay for these wars. And it is credit. These wars are all paid for on the never never. And in fact, what's really quite upsetting to realise is that in 1913, was it 1910 or 1913? 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act was signed in Jekyll Island, Virginia, which basically created the financial system we use today. It was organised. Basically, even though this happened in the United States, it was organised from the Bank of England. G. Edward Griffin, The Beast from Jekyll Island, is a book not to miss, I'll tell you. If that hadn't happened, the two devastating world wars of the 20th century, World War I, World War II, could not have taken place, simply because no one could have afforded them. If we had a gold standard economy, they'd be too expensive. And all that carnage would never have happened.
Don't forget Eustace Mullins.
Yeah, oh yeah, he's good too. Environmental destruction. Although I endorse what Richard said about climate change, you cannot disagree that human activity is having a terrible effect on the natural world. This is a forest fire in Brazil. By the way, environmental damage is a huge industry as well. Mm. Dozens of firefighters lost their lives trying to put this fire out. A lot of people got very rich from it. It's become almost like it's its own little. You can actually float environmental damage on the stock market now, believe it or not. You can also float fresh air money as well. Credit bonds are now people make a living buying and selling credit bonds. It's illogical and perverse and almost an inversion of reality, but it happens. But anyway, on the subject of environmental damage, Richard mentioned plastic litter in the oceans and lots of other things which I don't need to go into detail because he covered. But that is going on. Now, I believe that this is not natural for humans to live in conflict with nature. I think our natural state is in harmony with nature. We essentially have been manipulated into behaving in an anti-natural way by some people, whatever it is I'm going to talk to you about in a minute, who I think is pulling the strings. And while wars are being waged around the world, nations are also waging wars against their own citizens. The police forces have changed beyond recognition. You can tell by these two pictures. It's almost unbelievable. There's Dixon of Dock Green on the left. Evening all. Look at those guys on the right. If you were an old lady, would you ask them to escort you across the road? The police now are being trained, for example, there's more and more crowd control. They're trained in things such as, they call it sensitivity training, which basically means arresting people for saying what there's rude things on the internet, things like that.
Hate crime. Yeah,
there's all kinds of other crimes that never used to be crimes, which they can lock you up for now. This is really, the authoritarianism is reaching a level that was unknown just a short time ago. And killings by police officers has increased. One of the reasons, I think, with the BLM riots, they were so confident they could start these riots just exactly when they wanted to. Because they know that people are now killed so regularly by police officers. Not, contrary to popular belief, it's people of all races. But they knew they only had to wait a very short amount of time until someone who happened to be black was killed by a policeman, and that was all they needed. But it's because of this reason. Police officers, I've heard, also go through various kinds of selection processes that now are designed to filter out a sense of duty, a sense of empathy, a sense of caring. Yeah. So the cop who joins the police because he wants to fight crime and do good for his community is now less likely to join, and instead you get the school bully who can't grow up. They're more likely to get into the police force now, and you get those kinds of coppers more often now. There's actually a massive exodus of policemen in the United States, and of course the ones that are going to leave first are the best. It's the good guys who are going to leave first, and they're going to leave behind that. We're going to lose him, we're going to get them. Well, television and entertainment is enormous. It is enormously powerful now. You know, we all carry one of these around now. These little things actually give us access to movies, TV shows, books, although only 20% of people now read books, which is a shame. If more people read books, I think we'd be a lot better off, because you get a lot more information in books. However, most people just, if they read something, it'll be like newspapers. You open up an article and it actually has printed on it 5-minute read, 7-minute read, things like this. It tells you how long it takes you to read it, so you can fit it into your schedule between the soap operas and the sport and things like that. I mean, it's ironic, you know, because I don't object to these things per se. I like sport. It's fun to watch. It's exciting. Some TV programs are good, fewer than used to be, but some of them are still good. But it's, in a sense, it's been used, I think it seems to, as a tool of control, mind control, propaganda, making people think and feel in a certain way, so you don't need to control them by force. And it distracts people with matters of no real importance and discourages technical creativity. That is a quote from a document called Silent Weapons from a Quiet War, which you can find online. It was found inside a photocopier, and it's very, very prescient, I think, about I think it's real.
Is that by Zbigniew Brzezinski?
No, but it's funny enough, Brzezinski says the same things in his book, Between Two Ages, the Technotronic Era and the Grand Chessboard. These were books written over 50 years ago. Yeah, he predicts the world we live in now, including the use of technology. TVs now are like, this thing. When I was a little kid, the TV was a quarter the size of this. It was a little box in the corner of our room. This was not long ago, believe me not, I'm not that old. There was maybe 3-4 channels.
That's rented from Rediffusion.
Yeah, I used to rent TV sets. But the quality of programming was really quite high. There were some great series from that time, especially the comedies, I think, were far better. Today, like I say, TVs are much bigger. There's thousands of channels. The amount of resources put into TV production now is the same as in the big screen. You get the same amount of budget put into TV series now. In the old days, you know, TV's programs were produced with a fraction of the budget of the big screen movies. Today, it's more or less a parity. Yet the quality has plummeted through the floor. You know, the 999 channels you have of these very, very expensive productions are enormously lacking in technical quality and intellectual content compared to what they used to be. And that's deliberate. It's done deliberately. And what was it they said on Edge Media? Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Watching us, watching you, watching them. In George Orwell's 1984, every single person in the Big Brother state has a telescreen. A telescreen is a device which is a television set but also doubles up as a camera which will watch the person watching the TV set. Now, you couldn't switch off your telescreen, interestingly. Now, according to the CIA Vault 7 as exposed by Edward Snowden, modern TVs do the same thing. The telescreen is here. Some TV sets, not this one luckily, but they have like a little camera, like this laptop computer does, somewhere within here which watches the person watching the TV. And why is that? Why do they need to watch the people watching TV? And they say, oh, it's just about building profiles so we know about people's watching habits, which helps us in designing future productions. Well, I wonder if there's another reason for that. Considering the lack of honesty and the malevolence of these agencies, I think there is. Vault 7 CIA is probably is watching people, watching what they watch, watching how they behave, creating profiles not to create new programs, but how better to control us. And what's more, if you're ever in a room with someone, you've got one of these smart TVs, and I'll switch that off so that they can't listen to what we're saying. Don't just switch it off, pull it out of the plug. Because like the TV telescreen, even when you switch it off, apparently that camera's still working. Unplug it. Don't just switch it off. Make sure there's no power. Isolate it completely so it has no power. That's the only way you can guarantee it's not working, it's not watching you. Right. The goal is a dictatorial one-world government. Here you see United Earth. There's the laurel wreaths, which is a symbol of the Roman Empire, where all individuality, all communities, all senses of patriotism and separation and differences are absorbed into global homogeneity. And it's always dressed up to look really nice. It was portrayed as if to look really nice. They say things like, let's all come together as one. Let's be a world of unity and harmony. It's like, yeah, exactly. It's like the European Union, the posters for the European Union. You ever seen them? You see like little Dutch girls with clogs and white bonnets, and with little French boys carrying baguettes and wearing berets, and little German kids with lederhosen. They're all sitting in a circle singing Kumbaya, and it's like one continent, one people, and things like that. It all sounds so good, doesn't it? But that's not. I don't think of that when I look at. When I think of the European Union, I think of the Tower of Babel Parliament building. I think of Angela Merkel's dead eyes. I think of all those suited bureaucrats imposing laws on the entire continent, which we have no control over and cannot. And through the European Commission, which is an unelected dictatorship. It's amazing how if you dress something evil up as something good, you get like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Which interestingly is the symbol of the Fabian Society, which is one of these mind control organisations, founded in the spring of 1884, exactly 100 years before George Orwell set his book. Right, I found a hair grip here. Obviously it's not mine, it's not Dave's, but I don't know whose it is, but it's sort of lying here, and if anyone wants it, can come and claim it.
Yeah.
So, where did all this come from? Where did this come from? Well, I actually think Richard's correct when he says that there is a cycle of civilization and barbarism. In other words, there are prehistoric civilizations which collapse usually through natural disasters. Although, as we see at the moment, we're in a situation where there is an artificial disaster being planned, and they then go into they rise, they fall, they rise, they fall for various reasons. We've traced this. There's archaeological evidence that in a sense proves this. People like Graham Hancock, who Richard mentions, have discovered that evidence. This is a picture of Atlantis, which was said to be circular. It's like the Rishat structure in the Sahara Desert, which it could be. There's literally a thing in the middle of the Sahara Desert that looks like this. It's a very difficult. It's very out of the way. It's difficult to get to, but it's a fascinating thing to see. But no one knows exactly where it is. It could be that. Or
if you watch a YouTube channel called Bright Insight, you might have already seen it. He relays the Rikat structure to Atlantis. He does a very good job of it as well. I highly recommend it.
Atlantis could be in other places as well, but it's described by Plato in his book Atlantis and in several other books that he produced. As you explained, he got it from Solon. Solon got it from Egypt. It's a perennial story though that exists in all cultures. In Wales we have Cantareva Gwaelod. There's also the Zulu myth of Zaraleli. There's the Vedas, which talk about Manu, which essentially is the same story as one of our famous catastrophe stories, Noah and the Ark. It's literally the same story. But they tell of a high civilization that fell into degeneracy through moral decadence, and the gods eventually got fed up with them and destroyed them, and usually through flooding, volcanoes, natural disasters, things like that. And they then had to begin this again as children, to quote the Plato as Richard quoted them, and start off with stone tools and things like that. Now, it appears we're in some kind of descendancy at the moment, but this particular cycle is different, or at least as far as we know it's different to the others, because I believe the danger we're facing is not just a natural disaster, it's an artificial disaster. As I said, natural disasters might come, but how we handle the artificial nature of our decline will depend on how well we cope with any natural disaster that comes about. It's possible if we halt the artificial decline of our society, we can survive the natural disasters in some way with our civilization intact. This is Atlantis is the word that's often used, but you can call it something else if you want. It's a prehistoric civilization. Now, from what I've gathered from my research, and this is a long story, at some point in the roundabout the 10th or 11th millennium BC, during the later Atlantean period, which was, as Richard said, the Younger Dryas, an organisation came into being, which it's who they were or what they were, I can't go into details about now. We can thrash it out later on after a few drinks. In my view, I think it's some kind of supernatural malevolent force that was working in this universe. It's not just bad people, it's bad supernatural entities working through people, through controlling people. And they go by various names. I use the term Illuminati. You can call them the Cabal, the Deep State, the New World Order, whatever you like, it doesn't matter. They had their own word for themselves back then. But in the late Atlantean period, it appears they took over and began infecting the body politic with various bad, dangerous ideas, which eventually led to the downfall of the civilization, along with whatever natural disaster happened, the end of the Ice Age, the floods and things like that. Thousands of years later, it appears that this organisation started to infect the earliest civilizations in the historical period, that is basically from the end of the 3rd millennium BC, when Egypt and Sumer first emerged from the chaos of prehistory. They didn't succeed completely. They still haven't completely succeeded. However, there's no doubt that I think this agenda came of age roughly 2,000 years ago, when Doggerland was just disappearing beneath the sea, with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was an extraordinary thing. It stretched all the way from where we are now, actually, in the north of England by the Hadrian's Wall, to the Persian Gulf. This huge political entity held together by worship of the Caesar. And you see a lot of the symbolism in the Roman Empire. You still see in authoritarian states, or indeed within any state today, the laurel wreath, classical architecture, the pillars, the Doric pillars and things like that. You see obelisks and domes. These are actually occult symbols, which represent sexual energy. You see the fasci, the bundle of rods with the axe, which is where we get the word fascism, and things like that. Now, even though these were common in Rome, the Eternal City, the ruins are still there, you can see them today, the architecture and symbolism is exactly the same in cities like Paris, Washington DC, the City of London. The City of London, interestingly, was destroyed in 1666, the year with 3 sixes in it, by a great big fire, which basically produced a tabula rasa for indicius like Sir Christopher Wren to build a completely new city. Washington DC again was created in as a planned city and with huge amounts of symbolism in it. It's the second biggest Illuminati temple in the world after Paris. Paris, the same thing happened. It was completely redesigned by someone called Baron Haussmann, who was a Freemason, senior member of the I forgot what other organisations he was in, but he was I think he was a member of the Prière de Sion, which is the same organisation as Sir Christopher Wren. Again, built Paris with the same symbolism in. Now this monolithic, powerful structure was absolutely astonishing. Now, in order to preserve just one little corner of it, I'll go back a bit. Look at the top right, the top left of this particular empire. You have Britannia, which basically includes 2/3 of Great Britain. For all of it, right up to where we are, about where we are now, was ruled by Britain. And in a line going directly due west towards the Solway Firth. That was all part of Britannia, ruled by Rome. Rome wanted to conquer all of Britain, but they had to settle for 2/3 eventually. Now, in order to protect the 2/3 they had, they went to an extraordinary effort. They built what must be one of the engineering and architectural wonders of the world. And you can still see it today. It's right down the road here, starting at Segedunum, and stretching all the way to the Solway Firth, just north of Carlisle. A 73-mile long wall. Not just a wall, they had trenches as well, defensive trenches, fortresses. Thousands and thousands of troops were manning this wall. It's one of the greatest defences the world has ever seen. Hadrian's Wall was built for a purpose, to protect Britannia from invasion from the north. The Caledonians and the Picts, who occupied what is now Scotland and the north of Northumberland beyond this wall, were enormously, and Cumbria of course as well, were feared very much. The Romans were very scared that these people would destroy their rule in Britannia. So what's so special about Britannia? It could have something to do with the fact that this is where all the crop circles mostly, but there's crop circles all over the world, but it appears to be centred on this little area of land, this little island, Great Britain. It's also where lots of ancient monuments appear. There's an enormously rich prehistoric, pre-Illuminati culture here. Maria Wheatley is an expert on things like that, and indeed many other thinkers as well have actually researched that in great detail. The reason for it is, I think, there's something special about this little island we live on. Some people say it's the heart chakra of the world. That's one of the phrases that's been known. There's many, many other catchphrases you might have heard. But either way, the high initiates of the secret society network in the Roman Empire knew that. This is why they built Hadrian's Wall. This is why they worked so hard. Britain was very hard to conquer. It took a century and a half altogether for the Romans to completely subdue the entire island, and eventually the island up to Hadrian's Wall, and built in AD 50, around in the middle of the 2nd century, they built this wall. Now they went, and indeed at one point a quarter of the entire Roman military machine was in Britain, and in the Roman Senate there were people saying, why do we bother with this? Why are we so fixated on this little island? Why don't we just leave it? Let's focus on the rest of the empire. Let the Britain go to hell. It's not worth the investment we put into it. It's a white elephant. And the Caesars would say, no, we have to hang on to Britain. Britain's very important. And that's why. This is the heart chakra of the world. They were using the energy of Britain within the etheric body of the earth, with the spiritual side of this earth. And as Illuminati initiates, they knew they needed to have access to that. They probably carried out satanic rituals here in places like the Mithras temples and things like that. Now, in AD 60, there was a rebellion against Roman rule by Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe of Norfolk. They were kind of she and her army were kind of like the Brexiteers of their day, but they were much fiercer. I think Nigel Farage would be quite scared of this lady, actually.
He wouldn't look very good in drag.
Yeah. The thing about the Boudica Rebellion is very interesting. Firstly, it's a very emotive story. I mean, being British, I think we have a bit of a fetish for heroic failures. That's why we love Captain Scott and people like that. But also, it teaches us a very important lesson. It's been called the clash of history and prehistory. But I think it was even more, I think, than the participants realised, on both sides realised, the importance of this. It was the clash of the Illuminati versus post-Illuminati pre-Illuminati world. Boudica representing the pre-Illuminati Britons, and Rome representing Illuminati occupation. Now, it could have gone the other way where Boudica won, in which case the New World Order would have been over, and we'd have had 2016 in the year 116 probably. But it didn't. It didn't work, unfortunately. But there is a very, very important lesson to be learned from the Boudica Rebellion. Sometimes when you turn on YouTube and you get Alex Jones or someone like that going, you know what the Illuminati have done today? You know how powerful they are? You know that they have the control of this and they have control of that? They have trillions of dollars of resources. They're taking over the world. Sometimes I want to say, oh, well, Alex, what can we do about it? And they'll just go, the Illuminati have all this power. And it's easy to think, well, to fall into despair and think, how can such an enemy be defeated? How can we little folk ever conquer such an incredible adversary? But what the Boudica Rebellion has taught us is that the powers that be, powers that shouldn't be, the powers that were, whatever you want to call them, the Illuminati, are not in fact all powerful. They are mortal, they make mistakes, they have errors of judgment, and at times they completely fail. They failed once before and they can fail again. In fact, they have failed again in much more recent history, as I'll explain in a minute. But I do recommend Lord of the Rings as well, because J.R. Tolkien was in touch with very deep spiritual forces. The forces of evil are brought down by these little hobbits. These little creatures, these sweet diminutive creatures, these not great warriors. They have no magical powers. They just smoke pipeweed and eat food and eat lots of food and things like that. But they brought down, they destroyed the evil Lord Sauron. I think there's a lesson there for us all. And it's a lesson of hope.
I'm only 5'2", so I've got a chance.
You could be an actual hobbit, yes. You just need bigger feet, put hair on them. But yeah, it just goes to show, doesn't it, that we are not helpless and we can overcome. This is the system the Illuminati are using. At the bottom you have like all the people there. There you have religions, governments, intelligence community, military courts, corporations, the mega corporations at the tops, education, things, then the central banks. Then you reach the level of the think tanks, which is where the black world and white world meet. Below that you have the open politics, and above that you have the secrets world of the Illuminati. The Committee of 300. Now, there's a good book by John Coleman called The Committee of 300, which explains how all this works. Not to be confused with Vernon Coleman, the guy in the armchair. This is John Coleman. The steering committee for the Council of 300 is the Council of 13, who are the heads of the 13 Illuminati bloodlines. Springmeyer has done a genealogical study of these people, and the most powerful of these at the moment is the Habsburg dynasty. And who do you think the head of the Habsburg dynasty is?
Queen.
It's the Queen. Queen Elizabeth II is the current reigning head of the Habsburg Illuminati bloodline. The Habsburgs includes most of the bloodlines of Europe. The throne of England, the throne of Germany when it existed, and the throne of Russia when it existed.
Black nobility.
Yeah, that's it. And there's exceptions, like the French royal family was part of a different bloodline, the PS bloodline, which was a different one. But either way, these 13 families consist of the Illuminati bloodlines. At the top you have the world monarch, who I think is Queen Elizabeth. But above that you have that all-seeing eye. That symbol you saw earlier on the banknote, the dollar bill. The symbol of the Illuminati. The panopticon. What is that? Who is that? Who's above the Queen? Well, I think that actually doesn't represent a person at all. It represents something supernatural, something demonic. Something, to quote Rudolf Steiner, Ahrimanic. And I think that is what's controlling this world at the highest level. And how it's there, how we can get rid of it, well, that's a long story, but I believe it can be overcome. But, you know, Boromir here, again we come back to Lord of the Rings, brace yourself, the conspiracy theorists are coming. The likes of us, we're going to bring this down, aren't we? We're going to defeat this. People like David Icke, very influential on me, this guy. I was just talking to Bill about when we went to see his live shows. In fact, Maureen and I and several other people, we went to see him when he appeared at the racetrack here. Brilliant guy. Alex Jones. This was taken at the Bilderberg Fringe Festival in 2013. Look at that huge crowd of people. There was over 1,500 people there. I'm somewhere in that crowd. I met Alex that day.
That's long after He called Ike the turd in the punch bowl at one point.
Yeah, they got over that eventually. Now, the 9/11 Truth Movement apparently seems to have been a failure because, of course, here we are, 20 years later, and well, most people still believe the official story. But this is not what the original 9/11 Truth Movement hoped for. We hoped that within a couple of years they would expose everything. However, I do think that this movement has had an effect. It really, really has. And I'll be saying more at the end about public opinion and how public opinion has shifted towards conspiracy theories. But I think that any sort of lament that the 9/11 Truth Movement does at the moment, I think is premature. I think that it's the seeds that were planted 20 years ago by this movement have yet to germinate. Yet to germinate they will, and flower. But, well, unfortunately, I'm going to get controversial now, because we in the Truth Movement are not perfect. We have our flaws, and we're going to have to learn to overcome these flaws. If we're going to defend the 4 pillars of civilization, as I spoke of them earlier, we're going to need to behave like civilized people. And that's a bit tricky, because some people in our movement don't want to behave like that. Hands up here who's a shill, who's an agent from the government come to spy on us. Anyone?
Richard?
Anyone? No?
Man sitting in front of his identifier.
Funny enough, I did this in the Basis project and Tony Topping put his hand up. He always does. But of course, if you were one of these people, you wouldn't confess here and now, would you? Well, you can. It would be quite an exclusive. But hands up who's been accused of being a shill. Still no one? Oh, right, well, I did this at Basis and loads of hands went up. Miles put up 2 hands because he's been accused so much. Now, hands up, keep your hands up if you've been accused of being a shill and the person doing the accusation has presented real evidence. When I did that at Basis, all hands went down. The accusations of being a shill have done far more damage. They spread far more discord and disharmony and disunity and dysfunction than any real shill could ever hope to achieve. It's just almost internet slang now. It's almost endemic, where someone says, that person's a government agent, I just know it. This happened to me several times actually. I did a show called Planet X Radio, which was in Liverpool. It was online, yet it was also broadcast on the local radio network, and I did a show called the Emlyn Jones Show on there, along with Tony Topping and several other people. We got accused of being a front for MI5. Someone came up and says, you're a front for MI5. And our answer was, well, how do you know? Where's your evidence? Your website looks a bit like mine. Well, where's your website evidence then? That is the evidence! You've also got someone doing a show, this guy called Darren Perks. You've got Darren Perks doing a show, Darren Perks is a shill. Well, how do you know Darren Perks is a shill? I just sense it intuitively.
I've got questions over Darren Perks.
Well, maybe. Well, this is the thing to do, Richard. Anyone who has questions over another person in this community, there needs to be some kind of due process for sorting it out. We need some kind of tribunal system. A place where there's a judge, there's a jury, there's a defence barrister, there's a prosecution barrister, and people can then present the evidence in a controlled, civilised manner. And I think this can be done. It beats the ordeal by hashtag we have now, this medieval so-called justice we have at the moment, because this has got to stop, it really does. If someone, for example, if you thought Darren Perks was a bad piece of work, you present a prosecution case to the tribunal. Darren Perks would then have an opportunity to defend himself, and there'd be a judge and there'd be a jury who would sort it out. You see, whenever these accusations of shillhood break out, I've noticed a recurring pattern. You go back to the Facebook pages and you start going up through the comments and looking what happened. You always see the same thing. They had a personal falling out, a completely personal falling out, and it just escalated and escalated as Facebook arguments do, to the point where eventually someone just said, "You're a shill." You know, they aggrandized it into this fantasy where the person they doesn't like is a government agent because they just don't like them. This has got to stop. It's got to stop.
Steve Mumble comes to mind.
Oh, Steve Mumbling, yeah. How many of you seen A Cosmic Hoax? Dr. Stephen Greer's new movie. I am Dr. Stephen Greer. I am your Messiah. Spread before me. Who dare stand? Yes, Dr. Stephen Greer has well and truly dived into this. I told you this was going to be controversial. His new film of his is definitely his worst. It's an orgy of what I can only describe as wanton slander. I've never suggested that Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLonge and Christopher Mellon and people like that are people we should just believe. I'm not suggesting we should just believe them, but at the same time, the accusation Greer makes against them, he has no evidence for. How many of you have seen this? Have any of you seen this new video? Interestingly, he put it straight onto free social media, which is unusual for him.
Yeah,
you
usually
pay a lot to
charges a
watch
few
it.
quid before we
Yeah, normally you have to pay a lot, and you have to pay a lot, extortionate amount to watch his videos. Now, he also attacks Leslie Kane, which I think is contemptible. Not only does he have no evidence against her, he overlooks the fact that she's done so much good. She's been in the business almost as long as he has, and a lot of what we know about our relationship between the state and this phenomenon ourselves, in this infernal triangle that we currently have to suffer at the moment, comes from Leslie Kane. A lot of what I'm about to describe in a minute comes from her work with Ralph Blumenthal at the New York Times. So Greer, he hates saying this, he hates people saying this because he believes he's some kind of god. But he is not, and he's fallible. He needs to get his ego in check, which is not easy for him, but he needs to rein it in, sit down, sit in front of the Shield Tribunal and sort it out in a civilised manner. Because this is what we're faced with, as Richard said, the end of the world it's not what's going to happen, it's what might happen. If someone wants to know who did what to whom and who's the king of the castle and who's the dirty rascal, well, you don't mind if I reprioritise somewhat, do you? But is there any hope is the question.
Why I?
Do you think there is?
Yeah.
I think there is. I think there is hope. There is indeed. Now, Richard mentioned this, again, the 2012 phenomenon. On December the 21st, 2012, the Mayan calendar came to an end and changed over. A period of time in the long count that began on the 14th of August, 3114 BC. A long, long time ago. Interestingly, it was about the time that Sumer and Egypt first began and the Illuminati took power in those ancient civilizations. This long count then changed over on that particular date. What's more, it was the winter solstice, and the actual moment of the winter solstice, when the Earth actually does move, it's been calculated very precisely to the nearest minute, was, guess what? 11 minutes past 11, the 11:11 moment. Now, as you know, nothing much happened that day. I mean, Richard, people sort of forgot about it, didn't they, afterwards, because nothing really happened. I mean, it was an eventful day for my personal life because my partner at the time, her mother died, and so we had to deal with that. We still took the time to do a meditation at 11 minutes past 11, but generally speaking, it was we had other things we needed doing at that time. But a lot of people thought, oh, well, nothing's going to happen now, because I think we all had the idea that something really incredible was going to happen on that day. We were all going to wake up in the morning and we were going to have a massive spiritual awakening, or fire and brimstone was going to rain down from the sky. It was going to be like one of these disasters that Richard talked about, and we were all going to die. And, you know, there was all these kinds of things. I mean, how many of you? I know Richard's watched it. How many of you watched 2012? We Were Warned by Roland Emmerich. Any of you watched that movie? I did. I wish I hadn't, but I did. Yeah, I watched it and I went and looked at myself in the mirror and I thought, Ben, you're 2 hours older, mate. Yeah, I know Richard doesn't agree, but I think this is one of the, even by the standards of modern Hollywood, this was appalling.
It wasn't brilliant, but it wasn't bad either.
It was terrible. It was disgraceful. It was about like it was about a crustal displacement, about how the Bezoses and the others know about it, and they go and hide out in these big ships and leave the rest of us to die and things like that. It's a really terrible movie, and it frightened a lot of people. It was PG rated. Yeah, there's an entire 40-minute section of the film which you see nothing but scene after scene of the world being destroyed. It's really, really frightening for children. Now, I personally believe that something did happen on December the 21st, 2012, but it didn't happen at a level we could perceive it. It happened at a very deep etheric level within the Earth. I think the ancient civilizations like the Mayans understood this, and this is why they brought their long count about. And the thing is, they weren't the only ones. There are other cultures around the world that have very, very similar ideas about calendars and about the ages of the Earth. And what's more, the similar ideas, indeed the similar timing of their calendrical periods, strangely enough, matches quite closely, even though they apparently had no contact with each other. The Kali Yuga is only 4 years away. It's got actually not the Kali Yuga. The end of the Kali Yuga is only 4 years away. It says the end of time. Now this wheel here, which actually appears on the flag of India, refers to the Hindu calendar. The Hindu calendar is very complicated, right? It's similar to the Mayan one. It consists of endlessly recurring cycles on I think it's three separate levels. So there's large cycles, small cycles, and medium cycles. And one of these is the Age of the 4 Yugas. And the Kali Yuga is the one we're in now. And this is sometimes called the Iron Age. And it refers to, it's got ruled by the goddess Kali, who is actually the goddess of the underworld in Indian mythology. Now this ends in 2025. It's actually it was originally 5 years. I had to change it to 4. It's just 4 years away now. The Kali Yuga, which lasts a couple of thousand years, is going to change into another 2,000 year period called the Arya Yuga or the Satya Yuga. And this means the age of nobility, the golden age. And it's interesting, that's just 13 years after the end of the Mayan long count, when the Mayan long count changes over. This bit here, the end of time, it won't be the end of time. According to the Hindu cosmology, there is no end of time. Time is eternal. It goes through periods of upheaval. The god Shiva is very often accountable for the periods of upheaval and transformation, but it never ends. This is the dawning of the Age of Aquarius, the Age of Aquarius. When the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars. Come on! Love shall steer the planets and peace shall rule stars. I think that goes somewhere like that. Well,
we actually booed the cast of Hair.
Oh dear.
When this shit was coming about.
No.
We both they end up in they actually broke out in tears. It was at a festival, Plumpton Festival, I think it was.
The Age of Aquarius. Now, this refers to. I mean, the words of the song, they have more to do with. They fit in better with the actual song. They have to do with astrological sense. But the idea of the Age of Aquarius is true. There is the cycle called retrograde precession within astrology, which is the longest cycle of all, and it takes 26,000 years. And it refers to when the sun rises. All right, I'll stop after this one and we'll take a break. It refers to when the sun rises within the zodiac at a particular time of the year. And at the moment, we're on the cusp of the age of Pisces and Aquarius. It goes retrograde, so it goes from Pisces to Aquarius. It goes backwards in the opposite direction as the solar year, where it goes the other way. Now this is very, very popular within the New Age, within the hippie movement. It's a shame Rhonda's not here, actually. The idea is that the Age of Aquarius represents a change within the world in which we essentially ascend to grace following our fall from grace. The idea of the fall of man is, again, a perennial thing throughout our cultures, and the fall of Atlantis is about the fall of man, as is the destruction mythology and catastrophes that you see around the world. The idea exists also within mythologies across the world. If you compare them, it's amazing how closely they resemble each other, that we can actually re-attain the state of the divine from our fallen position. And the Age of Aquarius is all a part of that. That we can return to an era of peace and love and things like that. I'm not a utopian. I don't believe that utopia is possible. I think utopia is quite a dangerous idea, actually. It has fueled a lot of religious bigotry, as well as secular bigotry and extreme secular ideas such as Marxism. Yet, a dangerous idea is not necessarily a fake idea. If it is our destiny to return to some kind of higher state of grace, then we have to learn to deal with that. We have to be creatures of grace, I guess. And so, I mean, I don't discount it automatically. And indeed, after the break, I'm going to give you some examples of other types of the same ideas, because again, this is something perennial, and the fact it's perennial means it's universal within humanity. Therefore, it's probably true. Anyway, drinks will be served. See you back here in a short while.
Thank you, Ben. Can't spoil. Help yourselves to tea and coffee. still some more snacks there. I don't want any food left. Ben, thank you. We'll see you in part 2.
Do you remember that French film?
Where's the loo?
That,
I'll show you.
Kid went